All right, and live. Excellent. How's everyone doing? Hope you're all well, enjoying the spring. Uh, Pork is coming up in about a month and a half. Seems far away, but it's going to be here very fast. And so, in preparations, I've been getting ready to run the pork showers as I've done the last 4 years. This will be the fifth year that I've done it. I should probably make a dedicated video on that. But in the process, of kind of getting back into that mode and going through some of my old documents, uh, I've kind of come up with some new info on communal showers. Now, this is a topic that I find personally very fascinating, but one of the things that's most fascinating about it is how little there is. There's not a lot of documentation. There's very little in terms of academic research, studies on the topic. It's only opaquely, even obliquely referenced in popular culture. One of the main reasons that I started the Communal Shawl subreddit back in 2019 was because I wanted there to be a repository of information about the topic that there just wasn't. There wasn't a lot of information about it. And although that subreddit did allow, it's got like 38,000 members at this point, but people who were interested in the topic do tend to find that site. They could be interested for different reasons, obviously, but uh, it was successful as a repository. People did start finding related things and posting them there, but it's also very clear that there's not a lot out there. And so whenever I do find something that's pretty relevant, it's like, oh wow, this is like a real gem of something that's relevant because there isn't a lot. Um, I've even noticed going back as soon as they got ChatGPT and people started asking it to do communal shower stuff and posting it in the subreddit, it was pretty clear, at least to me, that a lot of the text that it was generating was coming from the subreddit or coming from the Communal Shower Association, which I'm also part of, a big part of most of the text in the Communal Solar Association, but like because there's so little on the topic, a very large portion of what is out there comes from me. And so when there are these AI aggregators coming, they're actually consuming that because there's very little other stuff. But not too long ago, I was kind of given a little access to one of the deep research models. And just another addendum on that, it's impressive what they can do. It's also interesting what they don't do because specifically ask the model to cite things, and there's one study out there about communal showers, and it didn't find it. Right? It's online. You can find it. It's accessible and searchable if you look up communal showers, and this deep research agent didn't find it, but it found a lot of other things, including a lot of things that I had never seen. A lot of this stuff I've seen before. I remember when I first in college, I didn't have internet really in high school, but in college, searching the term, a couple post new the Christian Science Monitor articles, New York Times articles from the mid 90s kind of popped up, and even to this day, if you search the topic, that tends to be the stuff that you find. And not surprisingly, like the AI found a lot of that stuff. It also didn't find all that stuff. So that's kind of interesting where that AI research is. But one thing that it did find, and it kind of caught my attention because it was about New Hampshire. So it came across a series of these documents, and these are guidelines issued by the state of New Hampshire on school construction. Now, these are issued not every year, but basically at the whim of the education subcommittee of the legislature in the state. Um, and it looks like they're coming out on average about every 20, 25 years. Um, and although they're about schools construction in general, right, it has everything about parking lot size, room size, how should the drinking fountains, or as they're called in New England, bubblers, be set up, that sort of thing. They do cover things like gymnasiums, locker rooms, and showers. And looking through, I was able to find basically all of these that exist. So this is not something that the state has been doing for 150 or 200 years. This is something that's been going on since the 50s. So the first one, if I can pull this up, As far as best as I can tell, we have one that was issued in 1952. The next one was issued in 1975. And then we have and the 1975 copy that I have is stamped that it was reprinted in '89. So it doesn't look like they redid any of the text, but maybe there was a reissue of the same one. And then the next was in 2006, and then finally in 2024, so actually quite recently. And these don't go into a ton of detail on any given topic. Also, reading them, I definitely got the sense that these were regulations or that these had the force of law because they do things like declare that this should exist, this needs to exist, things like that. When I was looking for these, the AI was able to find one or two of these. I was able to find one or two others. The 1975 was missing. I could not find that online anywhere, but I called the Department of Education here at the state and gave them an email, and within a day or two, they called me back and they said they had found it in their files. They said their files are not very extensive, and they emailed me a PDF of it. I also asked if there are any other ones, and they said it doesn't look like there are. I don't know how thoroughly he checked. I sometimes wonder with these bureaucrats, like technically you'd want to say they work for us, but I feel like they have stuff that they want to do, and some random person calls and says, "Can you give me this report?" They kind of feel like, "Why is this something I have to do?" But and maybe it's not something they do have to do. But regardless, this guy was on the money. He sent it to me. Um, he spoke briefly. I didn't do a full interview, but I just said, hey, I was curious if there was any legislation that gave these documents a force of law. Like, is there some kind of bill that was passed at some point that said, hey, when the Department of Education issues these guidelines every 25 years or wherever the case may be, does that mean then that, is there something that says that whenever a school is built or remodeled, that it must follow that? And he actually said, no, these are just recommendations, which kind of begs the question, then why are they made? New Hampshire is unlike a lot of states. This is not too uncommon in New England. It's uncommon in the rest of the country where a the focus of government, the locus of most decision making is more at the municipal town level and not at the state level and not at the county level. Growing up in Michigan, the state was a big part of your life. The county was a big part of your life, and even things like townships. I would like even when I worked at fast food in high school, I would have to pay taxes to a township and a county. There was a county tax, and the counties had things. And in New England, and I don't know if it's especially in New Hampshire, but certainly in New Hampshire, the locus of government is much more at the town level, and there's very little of the state that doesn't fall within the remit of this or that town, even if it's a town with a very small population and no appreciable urban center. So the role of the state is more advisatory for a lot of things. There's certain things where the state is more involved, that is more important. Education is not really one of them. So these are truly guidelines. These are not they don't have any force of law. They don't dictate what schools can and can't do. And also, practically speaking, even when they do, and this was true in Title IX, one of the things I did learn from the subreddit, t when they passed Title IX, there was an understanding that there was no expectation that every school in the country would suddenly rebuild itself to match the new regulations, but more a belief that if and when remodels were done, that they would then adhere to the new standard just because it's such a huge cost imposition. Uh, Maybe it's a barometer of how tyrannical or powerful a state is that it can or can't mandate that people do that. So these are interesting documents. They don't say a lot, but they do give you a little bit of a bellwether about where the culture is at on the issue. And so I'm going to just read a little bit. So, like the 1952 version, so this is the first one. So, this is 1952, State of New Hampshire. Technically, it's the Guide for Planning and Construction of School Buildings, 1952, State of New Hampshire. Okay, so if you go through this document, and it's basically a screenshot of a hand typed thing. So the state would have produced these. The state has these on records. I don't know to what extent that they distribute them or how widely read they are outside of the state. Again, and I also asked, how is there like a some kind of regular interval that these are done, like a rule or regulation says these must be done every so often? And the answer seems to be no. It's just when the Department of Education subcommittee decides that they want to act on this, then they will. And it does seem like it's happening about every 20, 25 years. Um, so this starts off by saying that locker rooms and shower rooms are uh, are important, but not for elementary school students. Um, it does say that the time available to changing and showering should be 10 to 12 minutes. Now, you're not going to make that period longer, so that means essentially then that class will be shorter. This seems like a lot of time. I feel like most times when I've heard of people who had to shower after class, and I'm not one of those people. I got to middle school right as they ended this policy, but everything I've ever heard was this is like a 5 minute thing typically. Um, there's prescriptions that the number of showers should meet the maximum peak expectation, right? So what's the biggest number of people that are going to be in the class or biggest number of people who are going to use that locker room? And this is actually where the functional difference between communal showers and stalls is actually quite important because the throughput with communal showers is much higher. You can do many more people, even with the same number of shower heads, or you can do more shower heads in the same size space than you can with any kind of stall situation. It is just much more rapid. That's not to say that you can't do the same number of people with stalls. You would just need more stalls, right? If you're looking at a situation where you have 10 to 12 minutes and you want 20 people to shower, you might be able to do that with two or three 5-person Bradley pulls, but you would need probably 10 or 12 shower stalls to do the same thing. And it also depends how you would arrange it. The geometry of the room gets a lot more from Dearborn in Michigan. It's not a rustic campground. It's very much an urban place with fake lakes and pools. But when I was younger, the bathrooms there, the bathhouses there just had communal showers. And at some point when I was in college, they upgraded them to stalls. And to do that, to accommodate the traffic, they had to build much larger rooms, much larger facilities because you just need much more space to accommodate that. So, and I also know this from running the showers at PorcFest, that even though my setup, which had 8 shower heads, right, 4 for guys, 4 for girls, which is less than half as many as the campground has. I think the campground has something like 24 shower heads spread into 3 bathhouses, but with stalls, it is just much slower. And I could actually do more people than the campground could in a similar amount of time. I have not seen them specifically say that in these documents, although I have found other older documents from like say the 60s where architects are saying, yes, this is why we do it. This is the one of the chief benefits of having a communal setup is the throughput is much higher. You can fit more people over a shorter amount of time. There's less delay. There's also a tendency, I mean, hypothetically with a stall, someone could use a stall and then finish and leave. But the whole point of a stall is that you're giving yourself extra privacy. And if you want to retain that standard of extra privacy, you can't just use it and get out. You have to basically change to some extent inside the stall. So when you're done, you can't just walk out and have the next person come in because if the whole point is that you don't want to get naked in front of anyone, which is the whole point really, then you need to at least put on your underwear, which means you at least have to dry off. And practically speaking, for a lot of people, this actually means they're just going to change, which means the time it takes for that shower head to become open is now reduced. And in fact, it may be half as much or even a third as much. It depends what people do. When I was in college, there were stalls at my college, and some people would go and they would bring like a bag with their shirt, their pants, their socks, and the changing bays. There was a little changing bay, but it was very small. It couldn't accommodate a lot. It wasn't easy to use, and so you would take a shower, and then you might spend another 5 minutes, 10 minutes getting dressed, and while you're doing that, that shower is not available for anybody else. So practically speaking, uh, if you're talking about trying to get uh, not even a big group, 10 people. If you have a class with 20 kids and half are girls or half boys, and you have those 10 guys or 10 girls, the idea that they're going to be able to do that in 5 to 10 minutes with stalls, unless you have a huge space with a lot of stalls. I mean, if you had one stall per person, then yes, you could do it. There wouldn't be any real loss there. But then that would mean you would need 10 shower heads or however many there are, and that's something that would be very, very difficult. What's interesting here, it says one shower head for each 5 boys. So the presumption here is that you're going to have uh, 5 boys can use one shower head in 10 to 12 minutes. Uh, so that's not a lot. That's not a lot of time per person, but obviously that would be possible. But what's really fascinating, gang showers are recommended for girls in a ratio of one shower head to 3. So there's this unstated premise that girls need more time to shower. And I have limited exposure to this, but I will say that when I traveled the country with my girl cousins, it did seem like it took them a long time to shower. Maybe also since I've grown longer hair in the last couple of years, I do notice that if I am going to wash my hair, which isn't every time I shower, but sometimes, it does take longer. Um, but this is kind of dancing around a topic that you kind of see obliquely referenced, but there does seem to be this view that girls and boys are different, and that girls need either more privacy or more elaborate, say, drainage systems. So one thing, and I believe this is from. I mean, it's not always explicitly stated, but some documents, including some of the Title IX stuff that I'd read, well, because women menstruate, because they might have a period, they need to have their own individual drainage basin, right? There shouldn't be a shared basin because then that shared basin could be, loaded with the menstruates from multiple different girls. Um, this, I guess, ignores the fact that men can also bleed, maybe not through menstruation, but from just getting hurt. I don't know what the special, I mean, blood is something you don't want to mix with people and get on people. You don't want feces to do that either. But the other thing is in these settings, um, unless you clean the basin every single time after every use, then you're not really going to get that effect because, okay, sure, let's say every girl had her own basin. She leaves, the next class comes in, unless you clean it before the next girl comes in, then there's still going to be a sharing happening. So I don't really know if that's truly the valid reason. And I think uh, there's some indication, some evidence that the real reasons are beliefs about female modesty, that women basically shouldn't be seen naked by even by other women in a safe same-sex environment, these other things about drainage basins and whatnot are actually not the real reasons that they support this. But they don't go into a lot of detail here. Um, Now, another interesting thing, it says, in order to meet objections from certain parents, one or two individual shower stalls should be provided with dressing cubicles. So to me, this is the ultimate kind of moderate compromise. You do have some people sometimes for reasons that are more understandable than others. I think the overwhelming majority of people who are afraid to get naked in front of other people are not doing it because they have a strong, valid reason, like, oh, it's such an ingrained part of my religion that I'll die or I'll go to hell. You do hear this sometimes with, say, Muslim students, but within Muslim cultures, there's a lot of variation here, so I don't know how stringent it is, and are we even to judge? Uh, there are things you could imagine, like if somebody had some kind of horrible scarring or some very particular personal trauma that was very specific to that, but most of the time, the reasons people don't want to shower is just because they're nervous about showering. Sorry, I was about to sneeze. And this is kind of like a good compromise. Okay, fine. If there's some people who are worried about this, you have a stall available to them, problem solved. Um, and it's interesting how that seems so reasonable, and yet it's usually not the way things have developed. Usually there's this, if there's any kind of pushback on shower policies, it just goes to we're just not going to do it at all. Um, they also go into things about the height, 4'6". So like I don't know, which they consider shoulder height. I don't know why you would want a shower head at shoulder height. I feel like you want it higher than that, but um, and another interesting thing too, and I've seen this in some designs, you want the opening wide enough that people can come and go where they're not blocking each other. And you also, if it's a really high volume place, you want an entrance and an exit that are separate so that the people exiting are not stopping the people who are entering. That's in a true high volume situation, but I totally could see it if it wasn't a high volume situation. Um, so it's interesting here. So like they are clearly though thinking these are necessary for hygiene reasons. There's an expectation these are going to happen. There is also clearly a distinction between boys and girls. They don't say that girls should not use communal. In fact, they specifically say that they should. It's appropriate for both boys and girls, but the girls should have more shower heads per person. Now, at this time, girls are definitely doing physical education. Girls are in gym class at this period. We do have women's sports in this period. Um, but I don't know if it's the case that they think that they're going to participate as much. You might have a situation where you assume in your normal gym class you're going to have 20 or 30 boys and only 5 or 10 girls. And so therefore they could have roughly the same size shower facilities, but uh, just there'd be an expectation that the males could handle many more than the girls. Um, Interesting. Now, if we go to the next one, so this is the 1975. And again, these are going to come to a couple paragraphs each. And I was going to split screen it, but I couldn't get it to work. So if you're really curious, I can send you the links because these are available for the most part online. So what's interesting here, by 1975, they actually start off the locker room section by saying these facilities, referencing locker rooms and showers as a group, these facilities are strongly recommended for elementary school. So this is different from 52. 52, they're saying not necessarily. I mean that elementary schools should do physical education, but that they don't necessarily need shower facilities or locker rooms. By the way, that is exactly the situation that I grew up in. When I was in elementary school, there were no locker rooms, there were no showers. That would have seemed strange. There was no changing. We would just go to gym class in the clothes we wore. Um, and then when we got to middle school, that's when locker rooms and showers kind of became a thing. Um, Now this is what kind of got me confused because this next sentence, especially if the gymnasium is to be made available to community use. So this is kind of another interesting thing, but I did have some experience with this growing up. You know, a lot of these schools, they're built by the city, they're paid for by the city, the town, whatever, and there's always an argument made by people in the town like, hey, I don't have children or my children are grown or whatever. I'm paying taxes for this, and yet this is a facility that then is essentially off limits to me that I can't use. And a lot of towns, especially smaller towns, have said, yeah, that's fair. And so school facilities are made available to the public to some degree. The degree that it is and the conditions that it is vary widely, but I know, for instance, at my high school had a gym. It was a small gym, but like a weight room gym. And that was open to the public. Now, there were hour restrictions. You couldn't just show up during school or even, I think, for an hour or two after school, but there was a period in the morning and also a period in the evening, like I think from 6 to 7, where you could go there. And it's my understanding, I never saw this firsthand, but that they could even indeed use the locker rooms. And I've heard stories like that. I've heard stories of people say, "Oh, when I was on the football team in high school, there would be local people at the school in the locker room because the school said, hey, this is open to the thing." So like this sounds like they're saying, well, it might not be necessary for the elementary school kids, but you want to have it there in case the public at large wants to use it. It was kind of interesting, but there it kind of speaks to the limited resources and the idea that these facilities should be used to their full extent possible, right? So like you're not if you're going to go to the trouble of building this building in a small town, and then say it's only going to be for kids in school, that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense from a return on investment for a taxpayer if you're going to look at it that way. Granted, most people don't look at how they spend taxes that way, but um, now here it says, and this is why I thought these might have the force of law, it says, lockers and showers in physical education are a requirement for secondary schools and should be readily accessible for both indoor and outdoor activities. Um, okay, so that makes it sound like it's a requirement that this is some kind of law. And as far as this goes, it's not a law. I did ask the Department of Education person on the phone, is there a, a single body of legislation that kind of manages what the facilities of schools are supposed to be like? And he said, no, it's spread all over the place. You have fire regulations maybe here, other handicap regulation maybe someplace else. Since they're taking federal funding, there's going to be stuff from the federal government and so on and so forth. But there's not like a single consolidated, here's all the rules governing what a school is going to be like. Um, There's stuff in here that there should be separate between places to store your clothing. There should be space between the showers and clothes so it doesn't get wet. All stuff that makes sense. Um, Says gang showers, aka communal showers, are suitable for boys and girls. Private showers for boys and girls should be available to meet individual needs. So this is now carrying over still from the 1950s. So, and that's actually interesting. That should be available to meet individual needs is underlined in the document. So nothing else is underlined, but that is underlined. And then it goes, mixed valves for automatic water temperatures control are recommended. Yeah. So having run the pork showers now, I get that. How are you going to mix the hot and the cold? You don't want something that's going to burn everybody. Uh, Bare concrete's not recommended. The walls should be glazed. Um, the traffic patterns should be laid out so there's no mixing of shoe and barefoot traffic. That's something I try and do the pork showers as much as possible. Locker rooms should be planned to include water fountains or bubblers and mirrors. One of the other parts of the document said that there should not be mirrors in regular bathrooms because, quote, students tend to linger. But I guess that's different in a locker room setting. So here again, gang showers are suitable for boys and girls, but there should be some uh, private showers available to meet individual needs, whatever that means. Um, so that's should in that case, like nothing in this document is mandated by law, so that certainly is not a mandate to have it. And it doesn't read like it reads like a suggestion within a suggestion. But again, you can see that there is even, 1952 and 1975. So this is the period when communal showers are probably at their heyday, at their zenith, that they're the most universal, that the most people are using them there's still this sense that like, hey, some demand for privacy, and there maybe are exceptional cases where this should be, there should be a privacy option. Okay. So then the next issue, so that 1975, that was reissued in 1989. I don't know if they did a whole thing, but the actual document that I have says that it was reprinted, or at least reprinted in 1989. But otherwise, the next one is 2006. So none in the 80s, none in the 90s. Right, so it's a very long, that's over a 30-year period, 31-year period between two of these. So there's not a lot of impetus to get these done, apparently. Um, This is interesting, but notice there is a major tonal shift here. So they have a couple paragraphs here on washrooms and locker rooms. It starts off the situation on washrooms and locker rooms are combined. It says most people recall from their days in school that washrooms can be places of mischief or worse. I'm curious what that could mean. The rest of the following paragraphs make it clear that he's talking about like bathrooms within the facility. Um, when we get to the bit that's about showers, which they don't have their own subheading, but you can find the paragraph. The inclusion of showers is something that requires thought and discussion. Okay, so this is very new. It was quite clear in 52 and 75. you need to have showers. There was some debate as if you should have them for elementary school kids, but you should have them for boys and girls. There's some interesting discussion about the ratio and that girls apparently need them more than boys, or you need a higher ratio. But now it's the inclusion of showers is something that requires thought and discussion. In today's environment, many children are reluctant to use showers at schools. Okay, that's probably true. This is 2006. It is unclear if this was not true in the past. This is one of the things that kind of is debated in the communal shower community. Is the reticence with nudity that we see exhibited now, is that a new thing, or is it simply that it is now tolerated and embraced in a way that it wasn't? AKA, in the 50s, may have not been the case, that there were a lot of people who were actually very nervous about showers, but were forced to because of mandates and circumstances. And so that reluctance, reticence, whatever, is not surfaced. It's a good question. I mean, we don't have survey information, so it's hard to know for certain. Um, it says many schools are being built today with few, if any, showers in the locker rooms. School boards and building committees should ask themselves if this is the best interest of the students. The practice of good hygiene would seem to require that students take a shower after strenuous activities such as physical education class or athletic event. Locker room showers can be designed and built in a way that protects privacy and encourages good hygiene. Proper maintenance of these areas will also help encourage their use. Oh, here's another. The administrative office for physical education teachers and athletic coaches must be placed in a way that they can supervise the changing areas of the showers. I will say that growing up, this was pretty clear because every locker room that I ever was in, the coach and or gym teacher had an office that was its own room, but that had windows so they could survey the locker room, which makes sense for reliability reasons. I mean, you don't want to see them trashing the place or getting into trouble. You can kind of monitor. Although I will also say that most of the time I was in gym class, the gym teacher just didn't come back into that locker room. Like we wouldn't see him sitting in the office watching us change. It would be there. Clearly, that was an option, but not one that was being used. So this is interesting. The inclusion of showers is something that requires thought and discussion. Well, I mean, to the extent that building a facility, I think that's always good to have thought and discussion. But why is this now a much more? So again, it's 2006. This is 11 years after 1995, which is the year when we get a wide national recognition that there's been a drop in communal showers. In 1995, we have a triplicate of articles written across the country from the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the New York Times along the lines of kids are not showering in school anymore. None of those articles, and I've read all those articles many times, and none of them, I mean, they seem to be kind of neutral about them. They're just observing this, and they don't really have an explanation as to why this has happened. Um, we know for certain that it was widely noticed in the mid 90s. There's questions about, well, is this a trend that started then, or is this a trend that had already been 10 years in the making by then? And that's a really good question that I don't have a good answer for. But you can see now this is circa 2006. They're saying, hey, this is maybe something you should talk about. The practice of good hygiene would seem to require students to take a good shower. This is not really debatable in the sense that, like, we know for a fact that the best time to shower the best time to take a shower to get clean, and the best way to get clean after a strenuous activity is to shower and to do it right after. Obviously, you can shower a day later, or 2 hours later, or 3 hours later, but the benefits go down, right? All the things with infections, all the things with buildup and whatnot, that's best taken care of, in the immediate aftermath. That's the best time to take a shower, right after, not an hour after, not 2 hours after, not when you go home. It's right after. And taking a hot shower with soap is the best way to do it. Deodorant is maybe good for, not stinking, but it doesn't really give any hygiene benefit. So I think that that's a bit of a hedge here because there really isn't any debate. And having looked at this for a long time, I have found things by researchers and physical education people who they don't care about communal showers. They're not looking at it from that end, but they're looking at it from the end of, I want the children to have the best hygiene possible. And from their perspective, that means they have to take a shower. Now, if they're unwilling to do it in a communal shower, then they should build, whatever degree of privacy is necessary, or give them whatever amount of time is necessary to make that happen. But they're coming that from a point of view, though, that this is the best way for the hygiene, for the health, quite literally, of the students. Now, if we go back to the start of the 20th century, this was a public health issue, right? This idea is like you're not going to go and walk around the school with your classmates, with your peers, not having had a shower after physical education or not after life. In fact, early in the 20th century, when they first started these, you wouldn't take it for granted that people would have plumbing in their house. And that even still, and maybe this is a good time to bring this up, that still can happen. I had a friend, a very good friend in high school, who's his house, he lived in a trailer house, whatever, but it didn't have plumbing most of the time. They didn't have running water, and they certainly didn't have a shower. They had an outhouse, and he would shower at school every day. He'd get there 15, 20 minutes before school, and he'd take a shower there. And he might take a shower at the end of the day too, because he knows he's not going to get another one until he comes back. Um, what's also interesting, and we don't see it here, but one of the other things that came up quite a few times in my research of this is in some states, and so in some big states like California, it's actually in law that having showers of so this idea that well, it's a thoughtful discussion. Should we not have them? Should we have them? In New Hampshire, there's probably not, as far as there's probably not a state mandate saying that they have to have showers. But many states, including states like California, do have that mandate. And there's actually a recent case, this is crazy, in South San Francisco, where somebody sued under the Americans with Disability Act and said, hey, my school or the school my kid goes to, or whoever brought the suit, right? Who one wonders if the plaintiff in this case is actually the kid and not somebody using the kid, but whatever, that I was not able to take a shower at my school, and so I was discriminated against. And so they lost the suit, and so the city was having to go and make all of their shower facilities, wheelchair accessible, disabled accessible. But what's fascinating in that case is like many of their shower facilities weren't really being used as shower facilities anymore. They were used as storage. So like none of the water worked, and then the space would be just filled with like boxes and crates and old TVs and overhead projectors and all this stuff. And so they had to go to this, I mean, quite ridiculous uh, process of removing all that stuff, putting in, handrails and a slope canter or whatever, and then rolling everything back. But the state apparently takes this very seriously, that you have a right to take a shower at school. The schools need to provide them. They need to be available. But there's this huge disconnect where yes, they are available, but they're not getting used. And here's kind of the what was lost in I think the grand bargain, because we had a system before that was mandatory for the most part. And I have my qualms with mandatory. I don't think it's good to force people to do things. I don't think it's good to force kids to do things. Um, I understand that the younger and less developed you are, the more justified certain types of involuntary coercion are, because you just don't develop necessarily, like if you grab a toddler who's running out into the street because he doesn't understand that he's going to get hit by a car, that's not the same rights violation that it would be to do to somebody else. But now, if we're talking about middle school kids and high school kids, and even out some elementary school kids, they're getting to a point where you kind of have to respect that their latent autonomy is budding, and I wouldn't, as I've said many times, I do favor conditional mandates. So not, hey, everyone has to take gym and everyone has to take a shower, but if you are going to take this class, if you're going to be on this team, that's part of the ticket, right? And if you really find that to be a problem, then you don't have to take that class and you don't have to be on that team. It's not required to be those things. That gives the student a buy-in. It gives the person, hey, maybe I'm not okay with this, but I'd rather, pay the price, so to speak. If you just straight up force people, I do think most people end up being okay. I think a lot of people end up being okay and overcoming it, but you're going to have a subset that are not going to be okay, and they're going to have it. That's the worst possible way to have the experience, is to be forced. So, but what was interesting is, so these mandates were quietly dropped, and I have to say they really were quietly dropped, because I cannot find hardly any records of school boards saying, in our meeting. I mean, I searched and searched and searched. I searched a couple years ago. I went through all online, like every online school board minute in the state of New Hampshire that exists, all of them, and made them searchable, and searched all of them. and it literally never comes up. Never. Right? So like those policies clearly change because they change. They're not the way that they used to be. But the deliberations, decision making, all that stuff is so opaque that it's not making it into at least the searchable record. Now, granted, some records are going to be offline, they're going to be in physical copies, or maybe just not recorded. You could also say that the degree of detail in a school board meeting is not great. It's not like they have a stenographer who records everything. Um, Nowadays, they should be video recorded and all that should be put available. And the more um, I don't know, reputable municipalities out there do that already, but they haven't always been doing that, obviously. It wouldn't have been practical for most of their history. So that's interesting, but the shift wasn't mandatory to voluntary with a stall or two. It was mandatory to nothing. Uh, it we don't really have this middle ground where we say, okay, it's optional and some people do it and some people don't. Uh, and or an option where we say, well, we'll have communal and then we'll have one or two stalls for the people who really, really feel like they need it, as they recommended in both 1952 and 1975. They simply seem to scrap that to like these are not necessary. Don't worry about them. Uh, don't even suggest. I mean, they're even saying have a discussion, and it seems. I mean, to me, it in this situation where you have people playing football, you have people playing all kinds of sports outside in the weather, the idea that there be nothing available, and I do think I don't know, but as far as I can tell, I don't know that there are any schools in the state, at least, that literally do not have showers at all. But you can reduce them to the point where, practically speaking, it's not going to happen, right? If you have a building, a school building that has six shower heads and stalls, or even just six shower heads in communal, and you have that for your school, that's not going to really be practical for, a gym class with 25, guys or 25 girls, or with a football team. You have football teams that practice at the same time as a JV and a freshman team. You're talking about 100 kids sometimes. And it's like, what are they gonna, I mean, they're gonna do six at a time. Yeah, it's just not gonna happen. They're not gonna do it. Now, if you put in five Bradley poles, even if that was the same size space, and each Bradley pole had four or five shower heads, suddenly you're talking 20, 30. Ooh, now it could work. But they're not doing that typically, it seems like. So this is interesting. I think this is something to be discussed, and sure, fair enough. I also say though that like a lot of these discussions, and this is something I have like small amounts of evidence on, is that when you have a school board or anything like that, and they're talking about facilities, they're not going to build the facilities themselves. The city does not have the Department of school construction. Even a place like New York City probably doesn't have that, and certainly a regular city in New Hampshire is not going to have that. They're going to take out a contract with a firm that builds schools, and in a state like New Hampshire, there's only like actually a handful of them that are registered to do it. Right, because you have to meet certain requirements to be legally allowed to do that. I remember asking a friend of mine who audited a lot of school boards, um, because I had in the research I've been doing looking for stuff about showers, I found something about a gym doors. There's an elementary school very close to me, and they replaced a door, just a door in the gym, and it was $14,000 to replace that door. And I was like, how could that? Like, is this a gold-plated door? Like, is this like a airtight, watertight, bulletproof? And he said, no, it's not that. It's that in order to be a licensed, you can't just go to Home Depot and buy a door or just get an old door. You have to get something that's certified, and in the state there really are only a handful of certified companies, and so they can charge whatever they want. Of course, they know that it's the school that's going to be buying it, so nobody's like, oh, I'm missing groceries this week because we overspent on a door. And it's not even overspent technically because that's the market rate on the good. So like, but these school boards are going to defer to a very large extent. They're going to defer to what the architecture firm says. The firm that's going to build it's going to come, and they're going to say, I mean, and I mean, I have a good friend here whose father owns a big architecture firm that's done a lot of colleges and a lot of schools in the state. And so he's probably built something like in the last 20 years, 30 years, a dozen high schools and half again as many like college dorms or whatnot. And so if some school district that has a building that's 50 or 60 years old and is like, we want to build a new high school or a new middle school, and they go to his firm and they're like, tell us what, they're not going to tell him what to do or what they want. He's going to make a bid and he's going to explain, this is how we do things, and they're going to defer to his authority. And they're not going to come and say, well, actually, we have our own ideas. And, this doesn't, I mean, 9 times out of 10, who cares? It's like they're not going to come and say, well, we want our classrooms to be shaped like pentagons or whatever. I mean, hypothetically. Um, but one place I did get kind of a firsthand account of this wasn't at a school, it was at a rec center. I had a good friend at a rec center in Wyoming, and this was a very wealthy community because it's the largest coal producing area in the country, and so they had this enormous tax revenue from the coal production, even though they had a very small population. So that was just a crazy place because of how much the municipal budget was just totally out of whack relative to the population. But anyway, they had wanted to build a new rec center. They approached a firm out of Denver to build it, and the communal showers actually did come up because the original facility they had did have communal showers, and they didn't have a problem with that. That was just quite normal for them. And when they were presented the plans, and the firm said, "Hey, we're going to have stalls. There'll be curtains and dividers and whatnot." People did ask, "Why not just stick with the communal? We already have them, and they're cheaper." And they just said, "Well, this is how it's done now. This is the new ways to have the private space." And nobody sitting there is going to gainsay an architecture firm that's this is their 10th rec center that decade or whatever. So when they say stuff like that, there should be discussion or whatever. Practically speaking, and it's not just for showers, this would be for anything. Practically speaking, that is just a deferent that's going to say by default the construction company is going to get to decide this. Um, but again, they're completely practically speaking, you are basically saying forget the hygiene. The hygiene, however much that does or doesn't matter, its importance ranked relative to privacy is automatically always lower. And so you're not going to have, there's no debate here. And so like that's one of the chief things that's kind of changed over the years is that there always were privacy concerns, rightly, wrongly, to some degree, whatever. But people would have said, look, at the end of the day, the hygiene is more important. Now it's become really the hygiene is irrelevant in comparison. That no, if you tell them that, hey, this design will mean nobody will ever take a shower, practically speaking, well, then so be it. Even though that's, from a public health point of view, not great, or from the personal hygiene of the students, not great. All right, so that's 2006. The next one is 2024. So only 18 years, so like half the time between the 75, right? So they're getting more active. Now this one is much more brief. All right, so the other ones had all kinds of stuff. The shower head should be this, the space, the drying area, the types of tiles, the types of flooring, the ratio of shower heads to boys and to girls. And now this has just been reduced to 3 bullet points. And this is all under the umbrella of locker rooms. Sufficient locker rooms, changing areas, and showers should be provided as required by the physical education curriculum for students. Okay. Private shower stalls and changing areas should be provided to safely ensure proper hygiene. Floor in the shower areas should be slip resistant. That's it. So private showers and changing areas should be provided to ensure proper hygiene. There is nothing about stalls that is more hygienic, though. You do not get cleaner using a stall than you do using a communal. And in fact, they are much harder to maintain and keep clean. That doesn't mean that it can't. You can have a stall that's really clean, and you can have a communal shower that's really dirty, right? If one facility there's someone dedicatedly keeping them clean, and another one no one's doing that, then it doesn't matter what the type is. But if you control for, hey, this is the amount of janitorial assistance, this is the amount of cleanliness that's going to be put in, this is the budget, then stuff with communal is going to be much, much, much cleaner. And I can also speak on this from using the pork showers at PorcFest. Now this will be my 5th year doing it. Cleaning out a communal shower space is I mean, it is at least an order of magnitude faster, easier, and cleaner. There's fewer surfaces, there's no angles, there's less obstructions. So if you're talking about mopping or squeegeeing or spraying or whatever the case may be, the fact that it's one big open floor, and I'm going to switch to having just one big open floor instead of one for guys and one for girls, that can be done in a minimum number of strokes, so to speak, of the squeegee or the mop, where as soon as you start subdividing that into stalls, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. Even if the stalls don't go all the way to the ground, even if they're kind of like bathroom dividers where you maybe have a post and then there's a divider that goes up a foot, you're still going to be obstructed in where you can put your stroke. Say nothing of wedges, corners, joints, and worst of all, curtains. Curtains are just, I mean, they can be cleaned, but it's very, very difficult. They basically have to be removed, placed in the sun, bleached, and it has to be done pretty regularly or else they are going to get covered in mold. That's a surface that's very, very conducive to mold. And if you've ever been to a place that has that, you can see it. My gym has two shower bays, and one of them is communal, and one of them is stalls with curtains. And this communal, there's no mold or mildew that's visible. It's always quite clean. It's always got mold and mildew and even other things in the stalls. And it's not because they don't clean both. They have the same janitorial staff. They do clean both. They're just much, much, much harder to clean. And so the idea that for hygiene purposes they need to have stalls, they are not more hygienic. And that there's even that's assuming that they take a shower. But as soon as you start going down the route of your privacy trumps hygiene basically entirely, to the point where we're not even going to encourage, let alone mandate that you do this, what that practically means is just nobody takes a shower at all, right? So let's have a halfway point where we make stalls available and then the kids can still do their hygiene. That's not how that works, especially in the circumstance of schools where there's limited time, limited space. This might work at a campground where people aren't pressed for time, right? So the earlier relation, well, I said, well, at campground when I was younger, they had communal, and then when I was older, they had stalls. There's no, you can go whenever you want, you can take as long as you want, and so even though it requires more space and it's harder to clean, people can still use them, and it's probably the case that people aren't taking fewer showers there than they did when they were communal because of that flexibility. But you don't have that flexibility in school. And so what this practically means is they're just not going to take showers. Um, and they're just not going to take them at all. And so it's gotten to the point where like it is just very, very rare um, for gym class. For sports teams, it still varies. But a lot of sports, I mean, the sports teams that are doing the most showering seem to be teams that aren't using the school as a facility, right? So hockey teams never, almost never. There's probably none in this state. It's probably not even one in 1,000 high schools in the country, other than maybe IBF, some of these specific sporting academies like in Florida, where the school has their own ice arena. They're always going to be using local facilities, and those facilities may or may not have communal showers. Uh, and but within the schools themselves, if you switch to stalls and say, okay, now we have the hygiene and they still have the showers for the hygiene, but now they have the privacy too. You actually are going to get neither. Well, you're going to have privacy. They're not going to change. Like, but there's going to be zero hygiene. So you have sacrificed one for the other, and maybe that's a fair thing to make. This is why you have the discussion. But maybe have that discussion, and let's not kid ourselves. Like if we switch to stalls or having like three stalls, and that's the other thing. If you take the shower bay that was a communal shower bay that had 10 shower heads or two or three Bradley poles, it's like, well, we're going to convert that to stalls now because that's more privacy, and indeed that is more privacy. You're not going to get the same number of shower heads. Your throughput's going to go way down, and the next thing you're going to know is it's practically not possible for people to use them. I mean, they said 10 to 12 minutes in 1952. I feel like that's way more. I know when I finished gym class, it was more like 5 minutes, which you could have done something really quick in 5 minutes. It wouldn't have been great. But the military has shown that that is possible. 10 to 12 minutes, you definitely could have done it. But it's kind of performative at that point to say, well, we have them for hygiene. No, you don't. That there's no hygiene. And then the thing is too, people get habituated. It's just not necessary. But then if you never do it and then it becomes necessary because you actually did something, like you sweated a great deal or whatever, it's your time of the month, you had a bad day, whatever. Now you're not going to suddenly start doing them that day. And it's not going to work. I mean, if you're the only person, that's one thing. You're probably not going to do it because of peer pressure then, right? You don't want to be the one guy who doesn't do it, or one girl who doesn't do it, or does do it even. But uh, if more people wanted to do it, they're not going to be able to unless you have enough throughput, and you're not going to have enough throughput with stalls. I mean, it is a multiplication table of how much more space and effort you need for stalls. And that's the other thing about this that I should mention is that if you look at these documents, let's see if I'm looking here. Does this one have? It might have been the 2006. Let me see. Yeah, so when these are done by the Department of Education and the subcommittee on works, I think. And you'll have members of the committee who will be involved, and then they will invite um, industry experts to come and speak. And those industry experts are going to be, they might be academics, but typically they are contractors who build a lot of schools. And it is absolutely the case that things like shower stalls are much more expensive to build, and they also need to be replaced a lot more. So there's a pretty clear financial incentive. Not that it's a huge one. Like getting the contracts to the schools are very remunerative, and the fraction of that that's going to be tied up in whether the locker rooms are have 5 Bradley poles or 10 shower stalls. I don't know. It's probably a small fraction, but nonetheless, they're taking advice from contractors who have a vested interest in a certain type. And even Bradley Pole, who I've referenced a couple times, they sell the famous, so they're called Bradley pole showers. They're quite iconic, but even they will sell partitions, or even the most basic ones will add $1,000 or more, sometimes $5,000 or $6,000 per Bradley pole to turn it into like um, a something with, instead of 5 shower heads that are just open, you have 5 shower heads that are sliced up like a pie, so you get little stalls. But the slicing up to make it into a pie stall is going to cost a lot more. So when they create this, and then you have the contractors giving their input that we shouldn't have communal, we should just have stalls uh, for vague reasons, right? For hygiene reasons. Uh, their financial incentive in that is not negligible, right? If they're going to be built, it makes sense to build them that way. Oh, this is interesting. So, but you can see though this final kind of arc where they basically said we're not, if you want to have the discussion, if you want to have it, they're obviously not going to ban it. These facilities still exist. They may even still be built in some cases, uh, but they're basically saying, hey, privacy trumps hygiene, basically 100%. Rock beats scissors, scissors beat paper, privacy beats hygiene. And maybe that's the right call. I think that's an interesting discussion, though, because you're talking about actual things like actual hygiene versus your feelings. And that's kind of one of the other metal things that have kind of changed is like people's deference to your feelings, saying you don't like something. It's selective. I mean, if you say I don't like taking tests and I don't like having to do public speaking and I don't want to have to run a mile, you still have to do those things, right? If gym is still required, you have to go to gym class. I don't know about now, but gym was required when I was in school. And I was at the time very much against that. I didn't care about gym. I didn't want to be in gym. I was against athletics. I was against sports. But the schools, if I had said I really don't feel comfortable doing this, I'd rather not, they would just say tough. It's in the curriculum. And if I had said I don't want to give a speech. And I remember there was a kid in my class who, for whatever reason, did not like to speak. He could speak, he physically had the ability, but he was this close to mute. I mean, he would even in private one-on-one, but he had to take speech class. They didn't say you can't take speech class, and he would just get an F when he was time to speak. So like, and you couldn't say I really standardized testing makes me really nervous, so I don't want to take the MEP or I don't want to take the um, SAT or the ACT. They would say, sorry, you have to, right? You don't have a choice, and so it's kind of interesting where they say they can and where they can't. So like. Again, I don't favor universal mandates. I think that's not the right way to go about it. I think conditional mandates make a lot of sense, but I also think it needs to be acknowledged in policy discussions that if you go away from the communal shower model and say we're going to have stalls for privacy, we're not going to have mandates, we're just going to. And the thing is, like, they didn't even. I mean, this could vary, and I've heard reports that maybe contradict this a little bit, but they don't go from it's mandatory to it's not mandatory. They go like there's no middle where they encourage. They don't say, "Hey, we suggest you do this. This is a good idea. We'll give you time to do this." Someone was telling me a couple years ago that when he was in high school, they certainly didn't require it, but he and some of his friends really wanted to take showers just because it was gross. It was a middle period class, and they wanted to be fresh. And but he said, "Well, fair enough. We have the facilities. That is what they are for. If you want them, sure." And he started letting them out a little bit early to accommodate that, and it kind of became a joke where the other students were like, "Oh, they're leaving to get out early." But there's this whole range where you could encourage it, you could make the time, you could have the facilities be usable. I mean, frankly, they're not usable. Stalls are not practical for the time constraints. And when you are giving the when you have a stall, and especially if everything is stalls, you're basically saying you need privacy. It's not an option, it's something that you need. You're implicitly saying that with the architecture. And if that's the standard that you're going to have, then that implies things like you can't just shower in there and then get out and dry off and change. You have to change in the shower stall because if privacy is something that you need, if it's not something that is just optional or good in certain circumstances, but it's like a human right, um, then you're going to treat it that way. And there's another element here. This is an interesting one. Uh, I've thought this since I was a kid. When I was in Boy Scouts way back, and this is crazy to say. I mean, obviously, you could look at me and make all kinds of things about me and say, well, you're gay, you're all these things, and that's why you're into it. And like, you wouldn't look, I am gay, and like, if I'm not going to say I'll never notice if there's an attractive guy who's naked in a shower with me, obviously I will. But I got into this because I was strongly peer pressured into this by my friends in Boy Scouts. And none of those guys are gay. They weren't gay then. They're not gay now, 20, 30 years on. We didn't do gay things in the showers. They pushed me to do it. Uh, they led on it and they kind of pulled me kicking and screaming into that process. So you can thank those guys for all of this that has happened since then. But one thing that they talked about, and I've relayed this story before, and I think that there's something to this. We had a friend who we wanted him to shower with us because he was our friend and he was in our peer group, and we thought, hey, as part one of the things as our friends is we take showers together. And he was very, very reluctant. And he avoided it. He would come up with excuses. He would, oh, I have this is at summer camp. He'd say, oh, I have to do a merit badge. I have to do KP. I have to do whatever, or he would just not show. Eventually, we didn't force him to, but we told him that we were going to clean the showers as a service project, and he was obligated to help with the service project as Boy Scouts are, and he reluctantly agreed to this. And then as we were cleaning the showers, and they did need to be cleaned, these were outside showers. There was no roof. There was moss growing on the floor. They had a palisade, so it wasn't like open, but like you're open air. And he said that uh, he asked if he could shower if we were going to shower in swimsuits or naked, and if he could just shower in a swimsuit. And I didn't say this. My straight friend who peer pressured us also strongly, and it wasn't just him. He wasn't one person. There were a couple people who were really pushing this, but he said it's not really fair if some of us are naked and some of us are wearing swimsuits or underwear, right? There's something about that that's not equal. It's basically saying, I'm allowed to see you naked, but you're not allowed to see me naked. I don't trust you to see me naked. Like, you trust me to see you naked, but I don't trust you to see me naked. And we basically said, and actually not we, the other guy said, it's going to be all naked or all all clothed. And the 6 or 7 of us are going naked. So, and he was really nervous because he was uncircumcised, and he knew correctly that there were not other uncircumcised guys there, and he thought he was going to get made fun of. As it turned out, nobody said a word, and by the time we were done that first day, he was like, "This was great. Let's do this every day." He's like, "We should shower twice a day." He literally said that, even though before he did it, he was literally. Now, I don't want to say that anecdote. I think that's a very illustrative anecdote, but it is still, at the end of the day, an anecdote. And not everyone's going to have that experience, and so I don't want to universalize it too much. But I think it does draw on a point that there's something very unfair about a situation where some people are getting naked and some people are not. There's something saying, I don't trust you. There's a different standard that doesn't apply to me that does apply to you. And I even had this voiced to me by someone at PorkFest last year. And this guy was not gay. He was married. He and his wife and his kid would use the pork showers. And whenever I had a new person use them, I would ask them, if they had experience with communal showers, and I would also ask them, why are you using pork showers? So pork showers at PorkFest, they're communal, and you have to pay. They're not free. I charge very little. They pay one time, and then they can come for the rest of the week. Um, but there are showers at the campground. Rogers Campground has many more showers than I do, about triple the number. They're free. You don't even have to be staying there. I mean, they don't police it. So like you could just be there and you could go use them, and there's not like there's a Q code or anything like that. So even if you weren't staying at the campground, you could easily use their showers. And their showers have stalls. They have either curtains or doors, depends. It's kind of a hodgepodge. Um, and yet I still had a lot of customers who would come and say, I'm willing to pay, even though it involves using the communal showers. Now, there are a couple of reasons for that. Mine were much cleaner. I had reliable hot water, which Rogers did not have. Sometimes this didn't happen last year, but in other years, they just didn't have water at all. And I would make buku money. I always hope that's going to happen because I will make a lot of money if they ever run out of water. But like, uh, uh, but one guy said, uh, I like this because even though I'm not big on being naked, if I know, hey, everyone's getting naked, then okay, we're all in it together and I can understand that. What really would be upsetting is if I'm naked and other people are not. Right? That's the big, when people have the cliched Freudian nightmare about nudity, it's never that I'm naked with other people who are also naked. It's I'm naked in front of a crowd of people who are not naked. There's an assembly or I'm on stage or whatever. And if you have an environment, if you have a locker room situation where you say, well, nudity is allowed, but also privacy is totally, totally allowed also, even if you have a certain number of people who are comfortable with the nudity and would be willing to do it, they might be uncomfortable to do it if they know that half their peers are going to, just stare at them and not get naked themselves, right? So that's another thing to consider. And it discourages people who would otherwise be willing to do it. So even today, even the Gen Z, the iGen people, there are people who are willing and some who even positively would like to shower naked with their teammates, with their friends, but are worried that the other members of the team are not going to do it, and then they're going to stand out for that reason. And that also is showing a degree of I don't trust you, they don't trust me, and I mean it gets a little meta at this point, but then you start looking at like high trust societies like Scandinavia or Japan, where this kind of communal nudity is very much integrated into the culture. It's expected and it's understood. And then you come to a society like ours, and it's not as high trust. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it. You're basically saying, I don't trust you to see me naked. And that's okay, fine. But then you are saying there's a degree of trust that I just don't have. And it's one thing with strangers, it's another thing with people that you know or people that you're doing things with, like if you're on a team or a sport or work or some kind of group activity, and to tell them, no, I don't trust you. Okay, fine. You don't trust them that much, but then you are saying that. You're me, I don't really trust you that much. I'm not willing to be open and vulnerable with you. I'm not willing to cast aside my errors. So yeah, but I think these documents don't tell you a ton, but they do show that there's been a shift in emphasis, a shift in priorities. Uh, there's also a lot, and this is probably true with many things, but like I think they're kidding themselves and say, well, if we just build stalls, we get the hygiene and the privacy. You're going to get no hygiene at all, and the privacy becomes moot because they're not even going to change. They're certainly not going to shower. Um, it is not like, and I've never heard of this or seen this, even though logically it seems like it would be plausible. Like if you switch to just having stalls, that doesn't mean that now everyone showers and they're just using stalls. It just means no one's showering at all, and you wasted however much money you spent on those stalls. You may as well just not have showers at all, right? And that's also what ends up happening. And this kind of it's fascinating in states like California, and it's not alone. I think there's actually quite a few states that basically say showering is a right. The schools have to make them available, but then allow the practice to atrophy to the point that practically speaking, they're not available anymore. So, all right. Wow. Okay, that's all I had on this. If anyone has any questions, can you even hear me? Like, is my headset even on? Looks like it is. It better have been on. Hmm. Wow. Okay, that's all. Let's check this out. All seven of you watching, I can tell this is a hot topic. Going once, going twice. Maybe I should have posted it in the subreddit. That might have helped. Oh well. Better luck next time. Huh? All right. I think no one has anything to say. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all for watching.